All right, well, good morning, everyone. It's good to have you for another month on one of our webinars. Today, we're going to be talking about mastering Agile success, the art of crafting effective Agile requirements. Preparing for this month is one of those that's kind of interesting because there's so many things that influence the requirements on Agile. And so one of the things that you know is that those of you who I know are using this all the time, you know what I'm talking about because you're having to take into account so many different people, your product owner, your customer, not counting all the additional external things that might be happening to the organization or to the project. And so you'll notice that I'll talk about some things and then I'll chase a little rabbit with you to talk about 2 or 3 ideas to keep in mind as you're looking at the requirements. Requirements are not as straightforward in Agile as it is sometimes in predictive. Those of you who run traditional projects, we spend a great deal of time making sure we interview all the stakeholders and make sure that we have all the requirements. We get the requirements signed off and we get that statement of work and we lock it in. And then, of course, we baseline it so that everything stays the same way. Agile is kind of loosey-goosey for some of that and some more loose than others. And you find yourself getting into that situation to where you're not really sure what the total project is or what the total scope is in that way, even though you do have tools such as the roadmap and the definition of done and some of those things that we'll refer to this morning. So I hope you enjoyed this today as we go through mastering Agile success and looking at the requirements, building effective requirements. All right, so let's start about talking about the first thing. So what are the benefits of having good requirements in Agile? There's a mistake in people's mind in that because we're doing Agile and because the customer is shaping all of this, that we have the capability of not really needing to know what the scope of work is. Now, true, your scope of work in Agile is going to come piecemeal in many cases. And so what you'll find is that the scope of work, the way you understand it right now, might not be the scope of work after 2 or 3, 4 different iterations. And the reason for that, as you know, is because Agile being used, especially if you're hitting a moving target or you're not real sure what's needing to happen down the road, new technology, new thing that you're trying to put together, and so you're trying to learn from a lot of different environmental things. That's one of the reasons why people will use Agile is so that they've got that capability to do that. But one of the benefits is you're going to have a stronger understanding of when the project achieves success, enhanced forecasting abilities when you and your team are talking about that, better resource allocation, the ability to facilitate more continuous improvement as you're going through and making your project, your team more efficient and better on their deliverables, ease of prioritization, transparency to the stakeholders. And that way everybody understands what's going on. Those are benefits that we see. A lot more communication, a lot more engagement. And so that's one of the reasons why we want to do some of this and use Agile so many times. Now, to set this up properly, let's go back to the foundation of everything. The reason why you're doing a project is because it brings value to the customer. Predictive projects bring value to the customer, and so does Agile. The whole reason why you wrote a business case is to determine and show the value that that project was going to bring and why the organization should invest $1 million into that project. So as we look at this, we've got 3 different aspects of value. And so this is something that will help you on Agile because you have to look through the value eyes as you're trying to gather requirements. So we're talking about 3 different pieces of value. One is time, one is cost, and one is expertise that breed value to that customer. So a lot of times when we're looking at time, speed could be something that's very valuable to the customer. Many of you run these projects that you have a deadline, and man, you just can't miss that deadline. It could be regulation driven, or it could be a fine that comes out of it. And so time sometimes is one of those values. Cost obviously always is something that we're having to look at. We've got to get something done for a small amount of money, and so you're doing those type of things. And then expertise, being able to change and raise the expertise of everyone is going to be different. Now, let me give you an example. In time, you'd have regulatory type projects. You're always going to have to hit a deadline or there would be some kind of financial repercussion. On cost, you're trying to do it with a limited amount of money, especially if you're trying to do service level projects that might make a difference. Expertise is one that you might not be as familiar with, yet you're going to be, because if you're working with anything that deals with Agile, this is going to be the piece that people look at. And that's what you're getting to, is that expertise. We've got to upgrade and skill up our expertise in the area of Agile so that we have the capability in artificial intelligence, so that we have the capability of being able to utilize that in our organization, in our projects, and so and maybe even implement the entire thing for everything. So what makes crafting the requirements challenging in Agile or specifically even in Scrum, which is probably the most popular Agile framework that's out here? And the biggest thing is because we're running everything through a sprint or an iteration. And so that's going to be one piece of it. And so in a 3-week or 2-week kind of iteration, we're running a part of the scope through that. And so we have that scope of work that we're going to do in 3 weeks. We're going to be also having something that we're going to hand off to the customer. The requirements are prioritized continuously. That's a positive thing. But once again, that also creates a little bit of a challenge because I'm not able to forecast what I'm going to necessarily do in all my other sprints. A lot of times we do forecast, but we forget that we can't forecast and lock everything in. I can't plan 10 sprints worth of work and lock it in. If I do, then that's going to be more like a traditional project management rather than Agile. I need that flexibility. That's the reason why we're doing it this way. And the customer is actually in control of the requirements. And so what happens is the customer is constantly seeing what's happening. They're wanting more requirements or a different type of feature or different user stories, and they're working with their product owner to be able to rank those continuously. And then the product owners can create large sprint backlogs, could create larger sprint backlogs, and then team can complete within 1 to 4 weeks. And this last bullet point here has become a big challenge because many of you maybe have noticed that you were doing 2 and 3 week sprints, and now you're doing 5 and 6 week sprints, and eventually somebody's wanting you to do a 3-month sprint. All of those create a huge challenge if you're trying to run Agile. And the reason is because really one of the fundamental teachings, whether we abide by it or not, this is a fundamental teaching, we're to have no change orders in the middle of that sprint. That's the only chunk of control we have, is to be able to execute as fast as we can, knowing that for that 3 weeks, we're not going to have any change orders. If the customer is wanting something, then it's going to be changed in the next iteration, but not during that particular sprint. And so if any of you are running longer and longer sprints, you probably have noticed change orders are now starting to become an issue. People are wanting to talk about change. If you're running a three-month sprint, as one group was doing, you're going to have change orders in that 3 months because it's so long. The goal, remember, of Agile is to do something fast, do the least amount of functionality possible, and get it to that customer where you can start getting the feedback. All right, so if we're gathering requirements in Agile compared to traditional requirements gathering focuses on the customer surveys, the interviews, the focus groups, and we interview a lot of people to come up with what that scope of work is. Then when we go into the planning process, we plan the entire project and we baseline it at the beginning of execution. And then if anybody wants a change, we go through change control. So that's pretty standard for things. But in Agile, it's much more loose than that. And so the goal in Agile is that element of flexibility is what you're wanting. You want the flexibility because you don't even know some of the pieces of the project yet. Also in Agile, it allows requirements to evolve and change throughout the project. We do have evolving requirements. Most of us know that. What you thought you want the project to do, if you're in power and control, you want the project to do far more than that over time. And the product owner will actually be the person working with the customer most of the time to be able to come up with the product, refining the product backlog, and then helping the team or working with the team for the sprint backlog, which is the amount of features or user stories that's going to be done in that actual sprint. And so that sprint backlog should be somewhere between 1 and 4 weeks, once again, because of the anchor of not having change orders in the middle of the sprint. The user stories or product features are one of the main drivers, obviously, because the customer is wanting certain things, certain type of functionality, certain types of features. So user stories are the tool that is used to be able to bring this alive in an Agile project. And so it signifies the functionality. And so I wrote the script here for you to be able to see so that it kind of helps us narrow it down on what should be happening here. As a user, whoever that user is, I want this particular feature so that I can receive this particular benefit. I've seen this done with several folks who are doing Agile, and I'm thinking this is really spot on. And if you read any of the text, a few of the texts will actually have some type of phrase like this. And that allows you to be able to frame what is the most valuable piece for that customer. And of course, the customer is supposed to be keeping the product owner all updated with this, and the product owner is supposed to be ranking those features, and we're always supposed to be working from the most important to the least important. But the features are connected to those product features. What is it the customer is wanting out of these pieces here? Now, the other side of this, that's sometimes a little bit of a challenge when you're setting requirements, is the acceptance criteria. On the traditional side, we have real detailed acceptance criteria, and sometimes, once again, because of this looseness, we don't have quite the acceptance criteria. There's 3 different documents that will help you with this, and so with acceptance criteria helps you measure where we are in the project. Are we getting close to being finished with this? Is the functionality being delivered to the customer that they wanted? And so the common documents that seem to help us are going to be the MVP, which is the minimum viable product, the DoD, which is the definition of done, and the third is going to be the product roadmap. Now, your product roadmap is kind of an overlapping or an overview of all the product features for the project. And of course, that thing's still evolving. And so sometimes that's what keeps people from wanting to use this. But your minimum viable product and your definition of done are 2 that are really good anchors to be able to understand what the customer wants and what is the functionality that they want. The minimum viable product allows you an opportunity to know what is the minimum amount of functionality for this thing to be considered a success. Now, the truth is, as you know, this is going to evolve a little bit. Your customer is going to want, what's functionality that they want today. They want a little more functionality tomorrow, okay? And so that happens. And so you'll see it actually evolve. And that's just kind of one of the nature of using and doing Agile, because the customer is continuing to want a little bit more with this. But those 3 documents seem to help anchor you and your team to be able to know what the customer is wanting ultimately, even though you know it's going to change a little bit. Now, the backlog is your big pot of features and functionality, your user stories. So your product backlog is what that is. And so a review of the current backlog can help you. So it gives you the current items, status review of each item, identification of the item requiring refreshment. And so your backlog, your product backlog, your big master group, all the way down to your sprint backlog, which is what you're going to do in those 3 to 4 weeks, that's where it comes from. Your sprint backlog is a representation from the product backlog that has been reprioritized by the product owner. And so that means that you're always working on the most important thing that the customer thinks is most important. Now, as we talk about this, we talk about like it's cut and dry, but you know as well as I do that the team is actually negotiating with the product owner and maybe even the customer on certain items that have to be done ahead of time in order to produce a certain output or a certain type of feature for that customer. And so in many of your books talk about like it's all cut and dry. Here's the next sprint backlog and the team's just going to run with it. But you know better than that, because once again, there's a lot more interaction that's needed between the 2. From that backlog refinement, though, items are analysis and clarification, detailed discussion on each of the items, requirements, clarification, acceptance criteria is elaborated, technical feasibility is assessed, and risk and dependency analysis is part of it. Because once again, your team is the expert of people who's estimating how much work they can do in 3 to 4 weeks. Even though the product owner is giving them the work, the team is who's estimating it. The estimation techniques involve a lot of different things. Most of you have used some of those with the Fibonacci cards and planning poker, and then the dot estimation, just a lot of different things for prioritization and for estimating. And then estimation of effort and complexity. Your team is estimating this. So what I'm saying is that the product owner is not walking in there with 20 features saying, I need these 20 features in 2 weeks. The team is looking at those 20 features and saying, we can do that in a 3-week period of time. The product owner is not the one dictating the estimate. So there's a lot of consensus and consensus building that's going to be there. Now, this graphic that I thought was something that might portray a little bit. As we're looking at this, we're looking at really the process. And a lot of times when people talk about Agile, they talk about it as if it's does not have any processes, but that's not really true. So let's start with the top one up here, preparation. So when you're talking about meeting with your team and pulling some of this together for your sprint and being able to talk about it with your product owner. So announcing the time, date, and location, folks are coming together. And of course, remember, in a perfect world, you'd be relocated very close to your team, very close to everyone, so that you're walking literally across the floor talking to a person. You're not in 5 different buildings. And so Agile really goes in that direction of relocation, even though many of us are not able to do that. The other piece of this is discussing with the product owner the sprint requirements. Where did you get those? From the definition of done, from the minimum viable product, from the product roadmap. All of those kind of requirements will come from that, even though they've been narrowed down for one sprint to run right now. The point is you'll know that from that product owner and from the team being able to create that sprint backlog. And then presenting the items one at a time for each team member can estimate it. So the estimation in Agile is coming from the team, not from the product owner. And so the team is looking to see, can they do this amount of work in that estimated time for that one sprint. Now you'll notice I keep coming back to one sprint, and the reason is because we're not supposed to be trying to carry stuff over to other sprints. And I'm going back to what's in the perfect world as well. In other words, when we finish a 3-week sprint, we should be done with those 15 features and hand them off to the customer. We are time boxed into that 3 weeks. We've got to finish it by that length of time. If I've only done 13 of the 15 features, we hand those 13 off for the customer to be able to see in the demo that we do. But those other two would then go back to the product owner. The product owner decides what they're going to do with those other two features. And then you have individual estimates. And so this is where the Fibonacci cards come in a lot of times, where people will write an estimate on a card. I'm going to show you with just a sticky, but they might even do it on a sticky. They might write a number here. And so nobody knows what the number is, and all of us hold our numbers up, and I have 10 and you have 20 and somebody else has 5. And we talk about that estimate. What am I including or what am I not including in that estimate? And then the other piece would be finalizing the estimates. What can we agree to? And so everyone will take their estimates and then negotiate back and forth and agree that that sprint and that feature and that user story is going to take this amount of time. And so you look at the highs and the lows, and both of those were probably skewed with something, and you probably come to something much more in the middle. And then, of course, you're ensuring alignment. Does this feature and functionality align with what the ultimate goal of the project is? Does it align with what the customer values? If it does, then that's perfect. And then, of course, you'll close that meeting with a summary of the next steps and action items. And, of course, you're getting ready to execute. The whole goal of this, of Agile, is for execution. All right, so let's talk about a little bit of the roles and responsibilities in crafting these requirements. We're so used sometimes on the traditional side that somebody has already crafted the scope and they feed us the scope that we sometimes forget that in Agile, the team is usually the dominant player here. So let's look at a few of these roles. All right, so let's talk about the customer's role. On the Agile side, with our Scrum side, either way, the customer is a dominant individual. Not that they're not in traditional, but I mean they're there weekly, and they have a seat at the table with the Agile team or the Scrum team. And so the customer provides input, feedback throughout the development process, helping to guide the direction of the product based on their needs and preferences. Now, how are they doing this? One of the ways they're doing this is they're attending the demo. So we've got a 4-week sprint, let's say. At the end of that 4 weeks, when we finish, there's going to be a demo. And we're going to demonstrate what these features are and what we've done. The customer has a seat at that table. And then we hand it off to them for them to be able to start looking at and giving us feedback on how is that working. That's what we're talking about. So every time you do a sprint, that customer has a bird's eye view of what you've done and to be able to give feedback right back to the team on good and bad and reinforcement. So they engage in that user interface with us back and forth. And of course, they're taking those prototypes or they're taking those pieces that we're handing off and they're already starting to use them and coming back with this is really working or this isn't even close. And they're able to verbalize that with our team. The customers are also encouraged to interact with the development team, the product owner, to provide insights that can influence the product backlog, prioritization of the features, because once again, the customer is so embedded here that they have such a powerful capability of being able to share with so many people and share with that product owner. The product owner is always going to represent the customer. The product owner is going to negotiate with the team, but they represent the customer's viewpoint. And so this is what they're trying to do. They're going to validate what the customer says with the team and also the product's functionality, usability, all of those pieces. The customer is driving that because once again, the customer is the one who is making the choices. And that's the reason why this is constantly being reprioritized is so that we can hit that moving target that the customer has. Now, the Scrum Master's role. Not every project that you do has a Scrum Master. I know that. And if we were doing pure Scrum, pure Agile, we probably wouldn't have a project manager. We would probably have a Scrum Master, a product owner, a team, those type of roles and responsibilities, but probably not a project manager. So what many of us are really running, as we already know, is we're running some kind of hybrid kind of project methodology because of our culture and because of the type of projects we have. So let's take a look here for a moment as Scrum Master. Some people have mistakenly thought that a Scrum Master is actually another word for project manager, and that the Scrum Master technically has power over everybody. That's not normally the truth, and almost none of the texts that are out will support that. So the Scrum Master is more of a facilitator, and the facilitator is a right word because that person is making sure the methodology is being followed, that we're negotiating different aspects, and that their function as a servant leader. They're trying to remove blockers for that team so the team can run wide open during execution. Okay, so the Scrum team is trying to the leader for the Scrum team, and they're trying to adhere to the principles and the Scrum framework. They're trying to make sure that everything's working the way that needs to work. Now, they facilitate certain things. Now, it doesn't mean that nobody else gives any direction. Of course they do, but that's their role. So they're going to facilitate the sprint planning, daily stand-ups, which are 15 minutes every morning, sprint reviews, sprint demos, depending on who you research and read, are really kind of an interchangeable word. Sprint review and sprint demo would happen at the end of a sprint to demonstrate to the customer what it is. Now, maybe you call them something different, but they'll be called sprint review and sprint demo. And then sprint retrospective. That's like a lessons learned. Lessons learned takes place, or that's retrospective takes place at the end of each sprint and at the end of the project. And the purpose for it in Scrum and Agile is so that we can learn from that sprint and use that knowledge in the very next sprint. And so you're going to want all that. But the Scrum Master's role is facilitation, trying to get people to talk and share and making sure that we're following the right type of framework. No authority over the team, no authority over the product owner, and obviously no authority over the customer. This person is there for facilitation and help. The Scrum Master actually shields the team from distractions, external distractions. And so anything that comes up, they're there as that servant leader trying to remove that. So they're very supportive of the team. They're very supportive of what we need to do. They act as a coach. Sometimes this will be a person who maybe has quite a bit of experience, so they act more as a coach, supporting the organization and the customer. But the goal behind them is to remove blockades so the team can work that much faster. Let's talk about the product owner's role. Product owner doesn't have control over the team either. So the product owner is not walking in saying, I need 20 features in 2 weeks. The product owner represents the product backlog. They are the feature person, okay? They're the user story person. So the requirements are in their hopper. Everything about it is connected to them. Now, the thing about requirements on the Agile side is that the Agile side and requirements there are constantly evolving. They're constantly moving and changing because the customer is hitting that moving target and making adjustments, okay? So the product owner represents the voice of the customer, the stakeholder. They ensure their needs and requirements are understood, they're addressed. So they are functioning to make sure that the team can eat, breathe, and understand the scope of the project that the customer wants. They're responsible for defining, but the big thing is prioritization. And they are there to prioritize what is the next pecking order for those requirements. The product owner obviously is going to work close with the development team, but they are the requirements person. So if the product owner doesn't know about the requirement, we got trouble because that is exactly what the product owner is supposed to be doing. They are supposed to eat, breathe, and understand those requirements. They're accountable for maximizing the product's value and development team's work. They make decisions regarding the product releases and its features based on the business value and the customer need, and they communicate the product vision and roadmap to the team. They understand the vision of the customer. They understand about the releases. Now, when we talk about release, let me make sure this is clear. At the end of each sprint, we're doing a demo, and then we're handing something off to the customer to begin playing with and working with, okay? That is not a release. That is just a handoff of partial features and functionality to the customer. We might have 5 different sprints before we have release number 1. And sometimes that's a little bit of a misunderstanding because people will look at that and they'll think, well, I gave something to the customer, I released it to the customer. That's probably not a good term to use for that little handoff because you gave partial functionality to the customer. You're going to give that partial functionality to that customer probably 5 or 6 times, and then you'd have a release. But you and the team are going to be deciding about the number of releases, and you're going to be working with that product owner on those particular pieces. Now let's talk about the team. This team is a high functioning team. This team is not waiting for permission. This team is not asking permission. They are running wide open to try to execute this project. So the development team consists of professionals responsible for delivering potentially shippable product increments at the end of each sprint. So they're not there trying to ask permission. They're not trying to control the project like what we would do in a traditional project, okay? They're trying to execute. Their goal is execution all the way through. Traditional tries to control it. Agile, you're trying to execute it and get it to somebody faster. So the team's very self-organizing, very cross-functional, a lot of expertise there, and they're making decisions. And their goal is what do we need? What decision do we need so that we can finish this and make this decision now? They collaborate, they talk, and that's one of the reasons why so many times in almost any literature you read, they want to be co-located so that they're working on the highest priority project, and they do that until they get it out the door. Now here comes the next high priority project. Now that's hard to do. Most of you have people who are working on multiple projects. One or two maybe happen to be agile, and I get it. But the point is that you're wanting this team, if you're trying not to hold them back, you're wanting them to be able to make decisions. The team's role, they're responsible for estimating. They don't inherit estimates in general because, once again, the scope of that next sprint just came to them from the product owner who got it from the customer. And so the team is going to then estimate how long it's going to take to do those features or user stories. They don't really inherit estimates from someone else. And that's a reason why a lot of times there'll be negotiation between the product owner and the team. And so the team's accountable for the quality, the team's accountable for the estimate, and so the team is accountable for that negotiation piece. You might have the Scrum Master be part of that to facilitate it, but it's really between the team and the product owner. So why does Agile or Scrum not allow all the sprints and iterations to be planned at the beginning of the project? So this question came up in a Scrum class I was teaching, and I just smiled because if we do this, you're turning a Scrum project or an Agile project into a traditional project that's run on basically like phases. Because what's happening is you're taking a 4-week phase and you're planning all of those out. And yet we will see people try to do that with Agile or Scrum, and it has nothing to do with that. You do not want all of that. That's for control. You're not wanting control on the Agile side. You want flexibility. That's a reason why you're not wanting to pay for a change order. You're not wanting to have to go through a change control board and fill out a form and do a calculation on how much this change is going to hurt the project plan. The goal is flexibility, not control. Traditional, it's going to be control. All right, so Agile's focus is on embracing change. Many of you are working on those projects and you don't even know all the outcomes that's going to be asked of that. You'll see some of this as we start implementing in the next 18 months to 3 years, Agile and the Agile bots and all of these different things that's going to be able to help us in project management and be able to help us maybe even in our organization. Many of you will be on those teams to be able to do this. I'm sure you've just heard about this. PMI is putting together a team to write a standard on Agile artificial intelligence in project management. And I think that's spot on because it has the potential of being able to change everything in the world, especially in project management, to do some of the stuff that we're doing, that's some of the Mickey Mouse stuff, and for it to do it automatically for us and give us feedback without having to spend hours trying to find the data for that. So Agile focuses on changing data, changing situations, and so the methodologies include Scrum. They prioritize responding to change, following the plan. And that's one of the reasons why it's so hard sometimes for us to be able to gather requirements, is because of this right here. We're changing so fast that the requirements are changing so fast. And so the requirements that worked just even a couple of weeks ago might not be the right requirements today. And so that detailed planning of trying to plan all these sprints out isn't going to work as well in an Agile setting because we've got change, such a rapid pace of change. So iterative and incremental approach. Agile methodologies emphasize an iterative and incremental approach. We're giving it to the customer in pieces. So it allows for detailed planning at the project front. Front end would contradict Agile's iterative nature, where work is divided into smaller, more manageable increments or sprints to allow for continuous feedback, learning, and adaptation. See, we forget about the feedback that we need. The feedback is super important because that customer is going to be able to start playing around with that functionality and giving some of the feedback. And so that way you're able to see what's happening. An example of this is many of you have heard of Turnitin. Turnitin is like the #1 plagiarism software that is there worldwide. And so Turnitin is presently working on trying to come up with a software connection that is going to be able to detect when people are using artificial intelligence. And so for the last year and a half, I've been playing with it and working and Turnitin is working with many of the professors that for the university to see to let us see what's happening with it. And so in the early stages, it wouldn't catch anything, and now it's getting to where it catches most of it, but probably not all of it yet. And so the confidence level of it catching artificial intelligence writing at a university is still relatively low. And so, but probably by this time next year, they will have it finalized to where it will pick up most of the artificial intelligence that people are writing with artificial intelligence and putting into their papers. And so this will take care of that fear that people have of what's going to happen when people are using artificial intelligence to design their papers or their dissertations or whatever. And so it's been fascinating watching that evolution as to something that didn't catch anything to where it's catching most of it right now, even as it goes through trials. But however, even though it's catching most of it, let me say this, most of your universities have a policy about artificial intelligence, but you're also being told not to confront anything yet because you don't have that solid evidence yet. So that's what we're looking at when we're looking at those features evolving. Even with that particular project there, the features are evolving. And so you're taking baby steps as you go through each of those. So why are you using Agile and Scrum in the first place? It comes down to flexibility and adaptability. You want that flexibility. Of course you do. And that's why any Agile or Scrum methodology is being used. We're hitting a moving target. So by not planning all sprints up front, teams can remain open to new insights, market shifts, emerging technologies, enhancing the product's relevance and competitiveness. And that's what the customer's wanting. They want that flexibility. So you're working with them, and it's going to be new and it's going to change. And that's okay. That's exactly what you're trying to do. The other thing that happens with the requirements is because the requirements can change, like we're talking about, per sprint, and different and new features are added, this reduces your risk for that project and portions of the project. Agile's approach to planning sprints incrementally allows the team to manage risks more effectively because you don't know what you don't know 15 months down the road. So if I know more about the next 4 months than I do 15 months down the road. So it gives me that capability to be able to do that. By reviewing and adjusting plans at the end of each sprint, and that's exactly what's happening when you're doing Agile, what we can do is we can look at lessons learned and retrospectives and talk to the team and see what we just experienced and make a difference on the very next sprint or iteration that we're getting ready to work on. Now, continuous improvement. Continuous improvement has become a huge topic for PMI. And so PMI has made the huge changes in the area of continuous improvement for the PMP certification. And so Agile methodologies are constantly looking at that too. They have that lean mindset, doing the least amount possible, but also trying to be able to continually improve. So when we think about gathering requirements, it's not just the requirements and functionality of the organization that the organization wants for this one project. You might find yourself also putting in requirements that's going to continually improve or adjust something to make something better that's already there working in the midst of this. So by planning sprints incrementally, teams can reflect on their progress, gather feedback, adjust based on their learning, ultimately leading to a more prosperous and impactful product. And so once again, that product is going to have the capability of being able to be better and bring more value to that customer than what they originally thought. All right, so Agile principles influence when and how requirements are gathered. So on the traditional side, we're very familiar with using this on the front end. So we gather requirements on the front end, we produce a product and project and hand it to the customer on the back end. With Agile, we're giving it to them in pieces. So this is where collaboration and communication come in. What we think the requirements are, many times we're shocked in traditional because we find out at the end the customer is not happy. Agile should have minimal impact with something like this because we're talking to the customer all the time. And so if we misunderstand the requirements or they don't like the requirements that we have produced, then we have the capability of making that adjustment quickly. So requirements emphasize collaboration among cross-functional teams, and effective collaboration ensures that all team members have a shared understanding of the goal. So as a team, we know what those goals are because we've talked to the product owner, and then we're learning it as we go along, as we do our retrospectives, and we learn where we missed the mark in each of those cases. So that's causing our gathering of the requirements to be in pieces rather than all at the front, and it supports that. That transparent communication and open communication fosters that environment as well, to where the customer can say they don't like anything, and so it's nothing personal about it, but they don't like what they see, or it doesn't reach the goal of what they thought it would be. And so that allows that transparency to be there. User-centric. Agile allows it to really focus on the customer. And so Agile requirements are centered around delivering that value to the end user. What is it the customer needs? What is it that they're wanting? And so that end user is constantly our persona or our focus. We're looking at everything through the eyes of what that customer wants. That customer is also able to refresh that in our eyes because they're going to be at a demo in 3 weeks and tell us that, yes, I like that. This is something that's a little off of what I thought. And so that's keeping that customer in the forefront. Understanding the needs and preferences of the end user is crucial for creating requirements that align with user expectations, leading to a more satisfying user experience. The user-centric approach ultimately results in products that are functional and resonate with their intended audience. So many times people think that they know better than the customer. And so they make something that they think is better for the customer. And the customer thinks, well, man, this doesn't even come close to what I need. And so you've got that disconnect here. On the Agile side, you should be making things that fit that customer like a glove. And that customer ought to be able to see that and think that. So that's one of the reasons why when those requirements are evolving, they're not just evolving because the customer has a wild idea. They should be evolving because those requirements are getting tighter and tighter and tighter to what that customer or customer base is really needing. So that continuous feedback is super important all the way through. So Agile requirements stress the importance of continuous feedback. Continuous feedback with who? Well, you got your team and the product owner for sure, but you've actually got that customer setting there and that continuous feedback from them. So regular feedback allows you to be able to make those corrections and to be a little bit more spot on with what the customer wants. And so incorporating that feedback, the Agile team or the development team, they are incorporating the feedback from that customer, I mean, literally instantly when they're hearing that into the next sprint. And the product owner is offering, here are the features we need, and the team is making adjustments on how they're going to build that. So it's an absolutely a team effort from everyone to really try to do what the customer wants. Adaptability, flexibility. Of course, all of that we can see on Scrum and Agile how that happens. But when we talk about it from this, the flexibility is requirements enables the team to respond to new insights, market shifts, emerging technologies. And so think about it just like this. I mean, we just started hearing about a year and a half ago, AI just all of a sudden, boom, we hear it on the news and everybody's tripping over some new AI product on Facebook and all this kind of stuff. And so we were thinking, where has that been? Well, of course, it's been here for a while, but all of a sudden they had that jump with Chat GPT-4. Now, what's going to happen later this year when they roll out Chat GPT-5? And so you're going to see probably even another little jump. So that's a good example of emerging technology that influences all kinds of different things. And so then your projects have to look at things differently. On the Agile side, by looking at emerging technologies, it will make a difference on the decisions and the outcomes for some of these projects that are happening. We've already seen hospitals that are already adding artificial intelligence as a means of using something as a tool to be able to reinforce something they're trying to do and giving feedback to the customer, which is the patient. Embracing the adaptability reduces the risk because we're constantly talking and the customer is constantly involved. So we have a much higher possibility of hitting the right requirements and making sure the customer is getting the right value they desire. All right, so clear and testable requirements. This is sometimes difficult, regardless whether you're running Agile or whether you're running traditional. because what the customer is verbalizing is sometimes vague, might have some ambiguity into it, and so you're still playing the same role you do as a team on Agile that you do on traditional, and that is you're interviewing to understand exactly what it is they want. The good thing is your product owner is probably doing the bulk of this, and so they're probably spending more time with the customer interviewing them, and so you're interviewing the product owners how it's working a lot of times, but you're trying to get it down to how am I going to measure this? How are we going to know we're there? So one of the things that will help you, and I thought this little graphic would kind of walk you through pieces of it. So if we're looking at an agile or a sprint plan, and so you look at your project or release or your release planning for the project, this is really going to connect really big to the product backlog. Your product backlog is your big pot of features. And so you're looking at some of the releases. Your releases are going to be some of your deliverables, it might be a different name that you use. And so if you're working with a vendor, that might be exactly how that vendor is being paid by those deliverables. But a lot of times that's still very high level for us, okay? And then you're looking at the sprint plan. So you're looking at the sprint plan that has come out of the product backlog and you've worked with the product owner, which feeds into now we're executing that 4-week sprint. And then a lot of times we're going at the end of it, we're going to do that sprint demo. Here are the features. And then we're going to do that sprint retrospective. And then after so many, you're going to be releasing, you're going to have a release delivery. So you're giving that customer, you're releasing a totality of features and user stories. And then, of course, at the end of the project, you'll do a project retrospective. But that kind of gives you the process of what we're doing. The only thing is, none of this is locked in on what the outputs are because we've given the team flexibility, the product owner flexibility, and the customer flexibility to shape it their way. And that's part of the transparency and the connection here. All right, so the user stories and acceptance criteria. Agile requirements are often expressed as user stories, focusing on the end user's perspective and intended outcome. Clear and well-defined acceptance criteria associated with each user story provide a tangible way to determine when a requirement is fulfilled. So what are you looking for? You're looking for the data to be able to measure this and how we're going to measure it. Now, what's the challenge? The challenge is on the Agile side, with new technology and new things that we're trying to do, we are not collecting the data. And so that data maybe is not part of any process that we're currently doing. So one of the things you might be doing in addition to coming up with the requirement and understanding the requirement is, okay, how am I going to measure this? Well, now we've got to put a process in to gather that data so that we know that we are actually hitting the requirements the way the customer wants it. And that seems to be a gap that's happening. We all check money, we all check time. That's kind of a no-brainer for us. But sometimes you might be looking at a performance thing or a quality thing that you're having to come up and build a new type of metric of how do we know that's happening and what's acceptable here. User stories and acceptance criteria ensure the requirements are easily understood. They're testable, and testable is a huge word over on the Agile side today. How are we going to test this? How do we know for sure that we did this, that we did what the customer wants? And so that's going to be something that will be a discussion. How can we measure this? And what you might find is what you're testing in one sprint, you might change that testability for another sprint because it didn't test it as good and guarantee it as good as what you wanted. So you find yourself changing that. All right, so prioritization and definition of done. DoD definition of done is something that's talked about, but that definition of done could change as you go through your project. So Agile requirements emphasize prioritizing features based on business value and customer impact. Establishing a clear definition of done for each requirement enables the team to understand when a feature is complete and ready for release. And this all sounds great, doesn't it? It's all packaged. It's just perfect. One problem. You know what the problem is? The customer has evolving requirements sometimes. And sometimes that customer doesn't even know that they're going to want this other piece of the feature there when they're telling you the definition of done or putting together the product roadmap. They think they know, but as they see more technology out here and they see more abilities out here, they get new ideas of how this can save them money, how this can help their employees. Once again, going back to Agile, if we put, going back to artificial intelligence, if we put artificial intelligence into project management, we don't even know all the ways that it's going to be able to help us streamline and have ideas about how it can help our project. We have assumptions, we have some ideas, but as it matures, you're going to mature also on what those requirements need to be, because what happens is you're going to think, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it could do this. I want it to do that, and that way I don't have to research that. So it evolves in so many ways. And this is just the way it's going to be for all of us because of mankind. We do evolve. Prioritization and a well-defined definition of done streamlines the development process, ensuring that the team focuses on delivering the most valuable functionality and a clear understanding of when a feature is considered complete. This is always a discussion, and you guys who are doing this every day for real, living in your Scrum and Agile worlds, you know what I'm talking about. And that, so you find back and forth. Okay, we're measuring it like this. Okay, so why are we adding this other piece here? How are we going to measure that piece? And you'll find yourself having to be that picky. Continuous validation and verification. Now we have an actual process of verification and validation on the traditional side, but in Agile, you're having to do this as well, but you're doing it much faster on a smaller piece. So Agile requirements necessitate continuous validation, verification of requirements to ensure they're on track to meet business objectives. Regular testing and validation activities help identify discrepancies early, reducing the likelihood of costly rework later in the development cycle. So this is connecting how are we verifying that we're there, and also what kind of tests, what kind of experiments are we having to do on this? And this is some part of the creativity that an Agile or Scrum team might need that maybe a traditional team might farm it out. Many times on a traditional team, many of you are doing programming, for an example, and maybe you have a contract with a company out of India and they test it at night. So none of your people really care about the expertise of that, because India has that expertise, and then they feed you where the bugs are and what needs to be, the break fix kind of stuff. And so y'all fix the breaks, and it goes back to India the next night with something else. So all that's great, but what we're doing is farming this out. In Agile, you'll find yourself a lot of times, once again, that test worked, but we're having to test something in addition to this. By continuously validating and verifying requirements, the team can maintain a high level of quality, ensure that the end product meets the intended purpose and user expectation, and that's going to be one of the most important pieces. If it's not meeting the user expectation, then the end result is it's not bringing value to them. And that's the whole purpose for doing a Agile type situation here, is to be able to bring that level of value. Now, flexibility in implementation. So adaptive planning. Agile requirements call for an adaptive planning where plans are adjusted based on ongoing insights and changing circumstances. This automatically causes some folks in project management a lot of internal conflict, because we want to have all this stuff nailed down. Agile, by its own nature, is not going to have that. It's going to be moving, it's going to be changing, it's going to be adjusting. And so this allows for a more practical approach, because we can adjust to stuff. And so we don't get down here and then have this major change order. We can make small adjustments along the way and be able to hit that target as we go along. Emphasis on working software. Now, you know that Agile and Scrum were originally put together for the purpose of the software industry, and now it has actually evolved over into product development. And of course, that's where most of us tap into it, is because it's producing a particular type of feature or functionality. So the idea here was not control, but to be able to give something back to that customer that they saw and felt and used. And so that's why they said software development. Well, that's what you're doing at the end of each sprint. They're getting some of those features to be able to start looking at. They're looking at part of it. They're being able to give you some feedback on part of it. And so that's the strength of why you're using an Agile, is so that customer is saying yes or no as you go along. The other piece of this that you have to look at when you're trying to plan for the requirements is going to be the sustainable pace that you're trying to do. Now, by sustainable pace, that means that you're trying to run most of your sprints somewhere between 3 or 4 week sprint, and you're looking at what can we project? Can we project when the project will be finished? Now, there's a lot of myths out here where people were saying, well, I'm programming, I can't project, I can't tell you when the project's going to be done. And that's really not true. And I understand what they're saying is that creativity is hard to put into a plan, but you can make some projections in Agile just like you do in traditional. So like, for an example, when you start planning, you're trying not to overburden the team with excessive workloads. And that's the reason why the team is doing the estimating, and then they're giving feedback to the product owner on how much work they can do in those 3 weeks. So tools and techniques, we'll talk about this. We'll go back to this topic a little bit here in a moment. So the first is Agile modeling. This helps you with your requirements because Agile modeling techniques focus on creating simple but effective visual models. And so the better we can understand what it is that the customer is wanting, the better our team's going to be able to estimate it and know whether we've got the right requirements for that particular sprint. So the Agile modeling technique helps in promoting a shared understanding of those requirements. Now, this could be visual, it doesn't have to be, but it usually has a visual element. If you think about it, that many of the people have a visual element to them, they better understand what they see, they better understand the process, they better understand the steps, whatever it is we're needing to do to make sure that they can see and understand this. Prototyping is a wonderful tool, and most of us like to see that. Even if it has no functionality, the ability to be able to look at the black box that many people call it helps you be able to say, I don't like that at all. And of course, you know that up front to be able to change it. So utilizing prototyping as part of Agile requirements allows for a creation of a quick, tangible representation of the product. And then what happens is your team members are able to visualize it, your people are able to visualize it and give feedback back and forth instantly. The prototyping helps in validating the requirements and gathering early feedback. That's what speeds everything up. If you're wrong, you want to be wrong earlier. If you're wrong, you want to be wrong earlier. And that's the thing. I don't want to invest, 6 months and then be wrong. If we're wrong, let's be wrong earlier and quicker and faster. So your sprint demo, which is such a big piece of verifying and validating that the requirement I understood at the beginning of these 4 weeks is what we have produced. And so let me just kind of walk you through this from a process standpoint. Even though Agile is very loosey-goosey, this is still has certain steps that you're trying to connect. So the sprint features or user stories are finished. The demo meeting is scheduled and advertised, and you conduct the demo meeting of the new features. So you've got the customer, the product owner, you might have other people there. So the customer approves or rejects the features. That's where your validation is. The customer sees it, they like it, not quite there on something, okay. But the issue is that the customer is able to be there and see what's going on. And then you do a sprint retrospective. What did we learn? What did we do better? What would we, what it's almost like a lessons learned. And so you document that. And then what do? You return for more work on the product backlog. You go to the very next one. So it allows you to be able to constantly know what's happening with that customer as they go along. They're saying yes or no per iteration on some of these pieces. And it's not going to be perfect, we know that, but it is giving some validation for that. Automatic testing. This is where AI is supposed to be able to help in a lot of ways. We'll see if that comes about. I'm sure somebody will figure it out. But automated testing helps us to be able to do some things too. That's really pretty nice. Agile requirements benefit from implementing automated testing to ensure that requirements are met consistently and reliably. And all of that's fine when we're talking about it from the aspect of software and those type of things. That will work in those cases. But there might be some things that automatic testing might not be able to do as much. Once again, newer technology, new things that we're trying to do. And so you might be and will be looking at some of these probably in the future. So let's look in a little bit further here into continuous learning and influencing of the next sprint. So we finish a sprint, we try our best to have it time boxed. And so whatever the time box is, we want to stop when that's over. So let's say it's a 3-week time box for that sprint. That 3 weeks, when it stops and when it comes to the end, we stop the sprint. Even if we hadn't finished the other two or three features, sprint gets stopped. We do a demo, we hand those pieces off to the customer, and then the product owner picks up on those other 2 features that we did not complete. The idea that we're running over on all of our sprints is really not an Agile or Scrum type of methodology. And most of your researchers out here would say that fights against good requirements gathering for the sprints because you're really wanting to time box that in. So as you do this, this feeds you into that retrospective, one for the sprint, one for the project as a whole. And this is that learning capability, that learning knowledge that you're wanting people to have. You're wanting that team to be learning from the customer and from the product owner, but also from each other. And so that encourages the practice of holding regular retrospectives, not at the end of the project, I'm talking about at the end of each sprint, okay? And so it doesn't have to be a long thing, but it does have to be something that you're going to be able to talk with each other. And so by doing this, you can learn from those experiences, you can celebrate successes just like you would in a regular lessons learned. But the big thing is you've got your customer as part of this and customer input as part of this and your product owner as part of this, and your team to be able to be better in the next iteration and sprint than you are right now. Feedback mechanisms. Of course, you're doing a lot of this face to face. And so a lot of times people forget this. This is not an email exchange. This is where we're doing it face to face. You say, well, wait a second. What if we're not co-located? Then you do it virtually. You want to do as much of it probably verbally as you can just to speed things up. So seeking and utilizing feedback teams can ensure the requirements remain aligned with evolving needs, expectations, and ultimately leading to developing of a more prosperous and impactful product. And so once again, so is this going to be the best product that we can put out that the customer wants that aligns with their values? It will be and could be. And so those feedback is what's going to be there. All right, so let's go back to velocity for a moment. Since we talked about gathering requirements and having sustainability, this is what we talked about with velocity. Velocity is the average number of user stories or story points we're producing per sprint. And when you first start your project, the first 2 or 3 sprints, you're kind of all over the place, and that's part of learning. You haven't learned everything about it yet. And so let's say, for an example, we have 3 iterations, and that seems to be the average that most researchers are saying, that after we've done 3 iterations, we're now able to start coming up with a velocity. Now, what does that mean? That means that after I've averaged in how many features or story points or user stories, how we're counting these, out of 3 different iterations, I'm now able to start making some projections. So when people say, well, I can't tell you when the project will be done, that's not totally true. With velocity, I can start making some projections. And so I can start giving them a range. I can't necessarily say it's going to be done June 15th, but I can say somewhere between the 10th of June and the 25th of June, I think we're going to be finished, because I'm looking at the pot of features and user stories in the product backlog, and I'm doing my velocity as we go out through here, and I can make some projections. And that's going to make management feel better, and that's going to make your team understand it a little bit better. Now, we're not planning all the way out to that ahead of time. We're going to evolve those plans just like we have been doing with Agile and Scrum. But a lot of different pieces will come to this. So release times are clear because now we've got a velocity. If we consistently produce 15 features every 3 weeks, we can start anticipating what's going to happen. You also start looking at iterations. They start becoming more accurate. The longer you work together, the more accurate they're going to become. And then, of course, adjustments help the success, because you'll realize, wow, we had a hiccup here, so we had to make that adjustment. But consistently, we're going to hit that velocity as we go through. All right. Now, let me bring this to a closure here. We're just about out of time. Let me take a couple of minutes and tell you about a couple of things. One of the things that's not up here that we're going to be rolling out is called the 7-minute project management exam mastery. And so we're going to be doing in under 7 minutes a little video talking about the different aspects of the PMP exam. And so that's going to be hitting Facebook and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. And I want to do it on TikTok because I want the Chinese to be tapping in on this too, since apparently everything goes to them. But we're going to be doing it on Facebook and YouTube and stuff. But anyway, we're going to be talking about different aspects, and so that's going to be a little 7-minute deal that we do. We're going to try to do it weekly if we can. The other thing is that if you have somebody who's getting ready to take their PMP and they're needing a little bit of coaching for filling out their material, we do a mastermind. Free mastermind, doesn't cost them anything. And so we have 2 or 3 of those each year. And so put your people in there, let them go through it. There'll be some videos. They'll take some sample PMP test questions. And so we coach them a little bit about how to structure their material so that they're ready to take their PMP test. So our next webinar that we're going to have is on May 3rd. And so it's called Creating an Innovative Project Management Office. This topic came up a few times, and I actually was asked to speak to the Ukrainian project managers on this topic. So I actually did a 2-day seminar for all the project managers in Ukraine last year on this topic, and they've come back and asked me if I'd present again on something else. And so it turned out we did actually three different seminars, 6 days of training for the Ukrainian project managers. To help them be as ready as they can be and when their country, the war gets over, so they can rebuild. But anyway, so we're going to be speaking about this next month, about the PMO. So if you're interested in that topic, then make sure you sign up for that. The other thing, this is our mastermind group. We have 2 more left, and these are free. These don't cost anybody anything. So that we've got them for 5 days. It's not really a 5 days. It's really about an hour a day for those 5 days. So they're filling out they're filling out a form, being able to get their experience together. They start looking at trying to get all their material together before they go into a boot camp someplace. Plus, they'll be exposed to some different things to think about for the boot camps, different things to think about for the test. And then so we've got 2 of those free that are going to be coming up for them. And then here are the last, these are all virtual boot camps. And so we just finished one yesterday. And so I told Wanda I felt a little frazzled because boot camps, they run from 7:15 to 5:15, and we had people from all over the country that was in there last week. So when we're doing a boot camp, I'm the one who teaches these, so I don't give them to anyone else. And we're kind of on the semi-retirement kind of mode right now. And so I'm not bringing any of my trainers in. So if people like it, it's me. If they don't like it, it's still me. So, so that's kind of where I am. But we're going to do 4 more. We've got 4 more boot camps that we'll be doing virtually. So anyway, that's going to be coming up down the road. I'm excited about what we're seeing with artificial intelligence. I see Dieter on here, Dieter Thigpen. Dieter is a program manager for FAA, and so I'm writing this program right now. And Dieter and his all of his people have been super nice over the years. I have a tendency to test. They're my test group, good, bad, or indifferent. They're my test group. And so we're doing artificial intelligence and project management. So I'm going to be testing it with his group in June. I'm excited about it. It's getting so close to being done. So I'm excited. Thank you, buddy. And so it's always fun to be up there with those guys, but this is going to be a lot of fun. And we'll be rolling that out with some other components here too for some of you to get. So let me thank you guys for being here, being part of this every month. I think we had right at 70 that were on here. We'll have about almost 600 or 700 who will watch it by the link. But thank you so much for being part of it. I hope it brought some knowledge to you in these areas. And of course, it's registered for 1 PDU so that you can go to PMI and pick up your PDU for the month. Thank you so much for being here. God bless you. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. See ya. Take care.